On January 28, 1986, 73 seconds after launch, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart in the sky above Florida. 7 astronauts died. The entire world watched it happen live on television. It was one of the most shocking moments in American history. But what most people never learned is what actually caused it. Not a technical failure in the complex machinery of the rocket itself. Not a catastrophic engineering miscalculation from the rocket scientists themselves. A rubber ring the size of your wrist caused the deadliest disaster in NASA history, a part that cost approximately $5. This is the story of how one tiny rubber seal, and a decision to ignore the warnings about it, destroyed the most ambitious space program in history. To understand why a rubber ring could destroy a space shuttle, you need to understand how the shuttle was built. The space shuttle had 2 large solid rocket boosters attached to its sides. These boosters were not made in one piece. They were assembled from separate segments joined together. At each joint where 2 segments connected, there was a rubber O-ring, a circular seal designed to prevent hot gas from escaping. During launch, the inside of the booster burns at temperatures of over 5,000 degrees. If the O-ring failed to seal properly, superheated gas would blast through the joint like a blowtorch. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the boosters, had known about this risk for years. Previous shuttle flights had shown evidence of O-ring damage from the hot gases, but the damage had always been minor enough that the flight succeeded anyway. This created a dangerous false sense of security. Engineers began to assume that since it had worked before, it would work again. Scientists have a name for this dangerous pattern of thinking. They call it normalization of deviance. It means, if something dangerous happens but does not cause a disaster, people start treating it as normal. Now add one more factor that made everything much worse. The night before the Challenger launch, the temperature in Florida dropped to well below freezing. It was the coldest launch day in the entire history of the shuttle program. Here is the critical thing about rubber in cold temperatures. Cold rubber loses its flexibility and its ability to seal properly. The engineers at Morton Thiokol knew this. The night before launch, a group of Thiokol engineers held an emergency teleconference with NASA. The engineers begged NASA not to launch. They presented data showing that O-ring performance became unreliable below a certain temperature. They said the O-rings were not designed to function in temperatures this cold. NASA managers pushed back hard. The shuttle program was under enormous pressure to launch on schedule. There had already been multiple delays and the public and political pressure was mounting. Krista McAuliffe, a schoolteacher selected to be the first civilian in space, was on board. School children across America were watching the launch live from their classrooms. NASA told the Thiokol engineers to prove it was unsafe to launch, instead of requiring NASA to prove it was safe. This reversed the normal burden of proof in engineering safety. Under enormous pressure, Thiokol management overruled their own engineers. One Thiokol engineer, Roger Boisjoli, fought until the very end to stop the launch. He was told the decision had already been made and to take off his engineer hat and put on his management hat. NASA got the launch approval they needed. The next morning, January 28, 1986, at 11:38 a.m., Challenger launched. At the moment of ignition, the cold O-rings failed to seal the booster joint. For the first fraction of a second, the gap was resealed by combustion residue. Pure luck. But as the shuttle climbed higher and encountered strong wind shear, the temporary seal broke. A thin jet of superheated gas began cutting through the joint and toward the external fuel tank. The external fuel tank contained liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, essentially rocket fuel and pure oxidizer. When the gas jet reached the fuel tank, it caused a structural failure that triggered an explosion. 73 seconds after launch, Challenger was gone. Back in the classrooms, children who had been excitedly watching the launch saw the explosion on live television. The investigation that followed was one of the most important in engineering history. President Reagan appointed a presidential commission including some of the most brilliant minds in science and engineering. One member was the legendary physicist Richard Feynman. Feynman conducted one of the most famous demonstrations in scientific history, live in front of the commission. He took a small piece of O-ring material and placed it in a glass of ice water to show what cold temperatures did to it. When he pulled it out, it was rigid and inflexible, exactly what had happened to the real O-rings on the morning of the launch. In one simple demonstration with a glass of water, he proved exactly what had gone wrong. The investigation also uncovered something even more disturbing than the O-ring failure itself. Engineers had been raising concerns about the O-rings for nearly 10 years before the disaster. Internal memos warning about O-ring temperature sensitivity had been written and filed away since 1977. The problem was not a lack of information. The problem was a failure of communication, and a culture of silence. Engineers were afraid to speak up because they feared being overruled or ignored, which is exactly what happened to Roger Boisjoli. Feynman's report included one of the most famous lines ever written about safety culture. He wrote, "For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled." The shuttle program was grounded for nearly 3 years. NASA spent billions redesigning the solid rocket boosters with improved joint seals. They added a third backup O-ring to every joint to create redundancy. They also completely overhauled NASA's safety culture and communication structures. Engineers were given formal channels to raise safety concerns without fear of being overruled. But history has a cruel way of repeating itself. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart during re-entry, killing another 7 astronauts. The cause was a piece of foam insulation that had broken off during launch and damaged the shuttle's heat shield. Engineers had raised concerns about foam strikes during the mission and were ignored. The same pattern, normalization of deviance and suppressed warnings, had happened all over again. The shuttle program was retired in 2011 after 30 years and 135 missions. But the lessons of Challenger live on in every safety-critical industry on Earth today. Aviation, nuclear power, medicine, construction. All of them rewrote their safety protocols after studying what happened to Challenger. The concept of normalization of deviance, the dangerous habit of accepting warning signs as normal, is now taught in engineering schools worldwide, and it all traces back to a rubber ring the size of your wrist that cost $5 and was too cold to do its job. The most expensive disasters in history are rarely caused by the biggest or most complex parts. They are caused by small overlooked things and by the people who chose not to listen to the ones who saw them coming.